Utopias, dystopias, and today's technologies hosted by Johannes bringing a global conversation discussing technologies that affect us all.
Hello and welcome. My name is Johannes and I'm the host of this show. Today I'm here with Christian Lazopoulos and we will be talking about AI and specifically generative AI and ethics, as well as practical questions around its practice. Christian is a veteran in the realms of marketing and innovation. He has rich experiences with startups in the FinTech and ESG sectors, highlighting the unique strategies employed and lessons learned. He has also served as the head of innovation at Explain, where he unveiled a proprietary AI and big data powered solution for brands that invest in purposeful marketing. Additionally, he has been a member of the Sensidium Institute Center for Systematic Diagnosis in Marketing, based in Antwerp, Belgium, and the University of Ghent, where he gained great experience as well as training in the field of consumer psychology. So this is quite related to my own job actually as well, because I recently joined the Kingston Business School in the area of organizational psychology and behavioral sciences. So there's something to talk about there as well. Definitely. But let's start with the ESG and the ethics part. Can you tell me a bit about that? I've read that you also have a new ethics pamphlet that is going to be coming out. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement there?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, first of all. I'm sure it's going to be very pleasurable, and I'll learn a lot from this discussion myself. So AI is not something new, it's just that it has risen to the mass awareness of everyone in the last year and a half probably, because of the advent of very easy to use and open to the public solutions and platforms such as ChatGPT, or if you want to go to the visual generative AI, things like DALL-E or Midjourney, etc. However, this is not a new discussion by any means, especially when it comes to people that are at the core of specific disciplines, whether it's been futurists or future technologists, depending on the decade or even depending on the century, the name changes a bit, but it's always about people that usually have some sort of a scientific background and they've been tasked to think ahead. And AI is not a new concept. It's been around since probably ancient times, because there are actual myths about automatons and robots. And me being Greek, of course, I'll have to have some of these examples, like Talos, the robot, the AI-driven robot that I used to do guard the island of Crete. By running around it twice a day in a day or so, and it's not just the Greek mythology. It's always been a human, if you'd like, major dilemma, as well as major, if you like, ambition to see whether we ourselves can be creators in general. So there's one way right now being creators, and we had all these discussions, and still are having discussions on a biological level. And AI, just a dimension of that same, if you'd like, drive that we have, I think, as a species, but on an artificial level. So, and you can see this throughout popular or even apocryphal science, but also science fiction. It started with robots, and then because of the cyber element of, as we grew into from the mid-70s onwards, with the internet becoming also something that is part of everyone's life, we went into artificial intelligence in terms of a digital entity, not necessarily having a physical body, synthetic or not. So it's always at the core of all these discussions is always philosophical matters, and that's where ethics come into play, because ethics is basically applied thinking as to what should be right and what should be wrong based on whatever the context at the time is, sometimes on a universal level, but sometimes based on different cultures. However, in this case, this being an international thing, it's AI is not geographically contained in any way or reason. So ethics is going to be at the center of the discussion, I believe, for the few still years before we see even more of adoption of it as a solution. Should we? Shouldn't we? How far? Why not? These are all questions that we've been really discussing about it, but now it's becoming more tangible because many more people, as I said, are thinking and are either optimistic, pessimistic, or wary, or a combination of all. So that's why ethics is becoming, I think, a core, element for the discussion at least for the next decade.
Well, what is your stance with respect to ethics? Do you have a particular school of thought that you advocate, such as, for example, human rights or utilitarian approach, or?
Well, I think that it's a good question, because one easy way of not having an opinion is to still look into things and still do a lot of research. But I believe that once myself, I understand a bit more for myself, for my own understanding, what an AI entity would be, and meaning something that we would give rights to because it would be self-aware. I think then I'll be not human rights person, I'll be a universal life rights person, because in the end of the day, that's where things are leading to, I believe. At some point, we'll have that huge shift of paradigm where an AI entity would be very hard or almost impossible to discern versus a human person when it comes to thinking, self-awareness, and all the things that we hold as elements and as, if you'd like, filters of what it is to be self-conscious and be self-aware. If you think about it, we give more and more rights, quote unquote, to the animal kingdom. The closer animals are to us, which is a bit biased, going back to ethics, but still, the closer they are to us, the more rights we give them. But what does, if that happens, why shouldn't it happen with an artificial intelligence once it becomes self-aware? How close are we to it? I think we're closer than most people believe. I think we're, as I said, 8 to 10 years away, if you believe most of the things you read about, the major jumps ahead. But still, it's still some time to debate and put some context and a framework around it, but it's not that far away so as to be very, relaxed about it either.
But for this question, it really does require to open up the bigger can of worms of consciousness. Again, I am afraid, which is something I've come to on this show quite a bit. And it is, is it that we understand, if we don't understand how it is produced in a human brain, which would be the critique of John Searle, and I can see that point, and I feel quite. I feel like I very much agree with John Searle's point of view that if we don't understand how it works, and I don't think that it's similar to thinking. I think that consciousness is a different dimension. So this is this strange thing, because simply because the intuition that I come to is simply because if you ask someone who has meditated quite a lot, for example, a Buddhist monk, which is the usual stereotype almost, they will tell you that you become more conscious, or that you gain more consciousness the less you think, right? So the more you turn off the monkey mind, as they say, which is, I think, what we have implemented at this point. We have implemented to a remarkable degree the monkey mind, right? Sort of, you can chat. It can chat. It's even called chatbots, right? Or chat GPT,
Yeah.
right? So it can produce utterances that appear conscious, but it, when it says, it might say something like, this is an example that I've always come to. I can feel the wind in my hair or something. It cannot really feel any wind in any hair. It doesn't even have any hair, right? And it isn't in a way it cannot feel. Or at least that's my understanding. So this idea of, does it make sense to ask? But I've also been shaken in this because it is not 100% clear to myself either if it couldn't be possible that something like a robot could become conscious on its own somehow. I find it unlikely, because if we don't understand it, I think, when it comes to intelligence, we have to build it. We have to build it from the ground up, and we have to do a lot of experimentation and so on. Why wouldn't that also be true of consciousness, right? And if we don't understand anything, we have not much of a slightest idea of it. We have some really interesting speculative theories as to how this person gets into that head. In other words, as in, why is there a Christian who feels some experiences or can go through the world and experience the world, right? In real ways. It's not just that you have vision implemented, that you can tell the difference between a cow and a camel or something like this. It's much more than that, right? This consciousness. What is your view on this? Is this necessary for this sort of ethical personhood? I think it is, right?
It isn't. I mean, it is to deal with it and keep asking yourself. But for example, if we take a sensorial approach to consciousness and are connected to consciousness, like feeling the wind in my hair, for example, right? There are people that suffer from conditions where they cannot feel anything. Do they not have a consciousness? And they were born this way. I'm not saying someone who lost it but experienced it. Do we believe they're not, human beings with a consciousness? Saying that, I'm mindful also because, with psychology being in both of our backgrounds, etc. We do have people that are detached from feelings, right? And we don't believe that they are normal human beings in the sense of they cannot have empathy, for example. They do not recognize right from wrong, and this is, we consider an illness and an aberration. But would you take a very small percentage of, the population and separate it and use it as a paradigm in the sense of trying to understand a new way of being, because it's not a separate or different, it's just a new way of being in my head. And of course, when it comes to the original point you made about we don't understand how our brain works, we don't really. I mean, honestly, we don't even know. We don't know anything really. If you think about all the stuff we don't know, we just not even scratching the surface. We're at a very microatomic scratch of things. And I'm talking about even the basic stuff. So we know more about the space between the Earth and the planets versus our oceans, for example. This is, I mean, if you think about it, it's pretty basic. Why would you know still about the physical world that we live in? Don't actually completely explore it down to the last, nook and cranny. And then you can think about, how and why a brain works. We just now start to understand the quantum aspects and elements of our thinking when it comes to our brains. But the more we go into it, still we're at the level that more questions are being generated rather than answers being, given and provided. So for me, I'm of, maybe it's more practical or empirical, as you mentioned. If something works to the level where you can feel yourself or interact with it and feel the same way as you would interact with someone that is a person, what's the difference in the end of the day?
Well, I mean, in terms of the rights, right? So if you give something a right, it must enjoy that right? I mean, it's why would you give something a right if it's indifferent to it. In other words, I feel that at this moment, machines, a hammer or something like this doesn't have much of a right? It's a matter of serving our needs, and it is built for our needs. But now, if we are starting to think, okay, I think this is what it matters for ethics in a way, right? So this is a question I have actually for you. Does it matter for ethics? Is it not driven by that question, right? Why does a dog have rights now? Well, because it has feelings. It experiences the world. It can suffer. It can, be happy, or it can suffer, or it can enjoy the world. It enjoys these rights that it may have, and you see, but if an algorithm doesn't really enjoy rights, why should we give it to it? It seems kind of contrived in that sense.
Yes.
But if it's real. If it is conscious, then yes, of course, we should give it
We're not there. I'm not saying that at the moment whatever AI has been achieved in terms of a neural network, machine learning level, I don't think anyone has achieved what you mentioned. Like self-awareness or even the ability to feel whatever the feeling might be. At the moment, it's mimicry. I'm not disputing that.
Yes. But how do you know the difference? And when do you know you have crossed the line from mimicry to? You see, this is actually a tricky question, right?
It is, but as I said, it's not even applying the same tests that you would undergo with a human person, because you would have to devise a whole new set of tests and questions and experimentation in order to make sure that this is beyond mimicry after a while. However, saying that, if you make the analogy of how we came to be, if we believe in the evolution the way we think we understand it, like monocellular to this complicated, thing that we call a body, and actually that quantum mechanism that is made of a spongy, meaty stuff in our brain. Why couldn't you achieve that with electrons? Why couldn't you achieve that with just that element of whatever it is that makes up for the the algorithms and the mechanics of a neural network? I think it's.
No, I'm not doubting that it couldn't be done. But I don't think that we can do it if we don't understand the mechanism. So I'm not even saying, when you were saying, we don't understand the human brain and how it works, but it's even beyond. It's more specific than that. It's what I'm saying is we don't understand how this inner movie, or whatever we call consciousness, this experience of existing as a continuous entity and so on, how this particular thing is produced. I think once we understand how that is produced, I am almost certain that we will be able to build it somehow, right? But I think that is the lack, that the reason we can't do it is because we don't understand how it works, maybe.
Yes, as long as you want to build something that's completely the same as our brain. It could be that the mechanics and the mechanisms are completely different as to how our brain works, but still, gain consciousness, etc. And I'm afraid I know it's an easy way out saying anything is possible, because in essence, that's what I'm saying now. It doesn't have to replicate our brain to be necessarily conscious. All I'm saying is the only way that we have as a human, as a human beings, as a species right now, to potentially understand that there's consciousness or not, unfortunately, is through our own understanding of what that means. So, for example, you mentioned dogs. Why dogs have rights? It's not just because they feel, it's because we were mature enough to give them rights in the last few years compared to all the history we have with them. And again, there's still a lot of places around the world where dogs are just tools. Equally, there's no sentiment about them versus a hammer, and they treat them in a way that we feel is completely, bad or without empathy, etc. It's a matter of our maturization as well, in potentially broadening our scope of understanding about the physical world and beyond. So I'm afraid I have more questions than answers still today. All I'm saying is, and again, with in general, not just with AI, I'm an optimist. I truly believe that if we have a future that's going to go beyond the next 60, 70 years because of all the problems that we have on the planet right now, and, these, at least most of them are, proven, technology is going to help us resolve them rather than anything else, because we don't have the time to change our behavior globally speaking, on a big social level. So the only thing it's gonna help us maintain any possibility and any chance for the future, I think, is a great catalyst, and the biggest catalyst we have throughout our history has been technology.
I agree with that. I think that the human thinking is also necessary, though, and specifically with respect to what it is we want, right? So we have to shift. So I recently had a conversation about exactly this, and I think what we have to do is we have to shift from our understanding of how to achieve something, because now we get AI to help us to do that, right? So, for example, gradient descent or linear algebra, we don't have to think too much about that at the moment anymore, because it becomes, as they call it, democratized. I'm not sure that this is a good term, but it's something that's being used, meaning that it's becoming simpler to operate and to build things. So with this simplicity, we shouldn't stop thinking, because now we have the simplicity, we can easily implement a bunch of things. But now what we need to do, I think, is to allocate or reallocate our thinking to the puzzles that are of this ethical nature, of what is it that we should be building, and what should it do, and then how should this output look like, and how do we detect whether the output is actually what we want or if it is something else, and then quickly change course if we learn that we're producing something that we don't want to produce. And in a way, I think, further democratize it in a way that more people have a say into the algorithms that we're exposed to as well. So right now, Facebook, for example, or Google, they're dominating. There's a few hundreds, maybe thousands engineers working on these algorithms that are exposing us to various things, stimuli, if you will. But instead, we should actually all work on this, right? So and I think this is what democratization is also about, right? It's that this easier access, the easier ability to produce results in AI, or to use AI for your own purposes, now gives us also this responsibility to actually use it in wise ways and think about what could go wrong, right? And so if we do shift this alongside with technology, I think if our consciousness as a being conscious of how we're being affected, and then how we should be affected, and so on, if that grows along with our technology, I think we're actually in really good shape. But I think it doesn't guarantee that because we build technology in a very fast way that it will save us, right? I think there is this interaction that is required.
Yes, being practical a bit on that. However, I would say that in order for this to happen, so everyone can catch up and have a say and be a shaping factor, we'll have to really delay at the moment how fast things are going, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying, how practical is it? Because most of the obvious progress has been done by the private sector, and the private sector is very hard to take a breather and stop, because they feel there's always someone that might get ahead of them, might get first to some sort of a new channel of revenue, or some new application that's gonna, increase someone's share or anything like that. If we could achieve that level of, understanding and collaboration, basically across everyone who's now a player in this, to take a breather and start having a more rational, more efficient way of including everyone in the conversation, that would be ideal. But historically, that's never happened, and even when technology was not going as fast as it's going today, and maybe it should, because it's going now as every day it accelerates. But if you asked me how I would go about it, I would probably have to have a thing about a month or so to even start giving you some ideas as to how I would do that. How I would get all the big players to, sit on the same table and agree on things with the representation of everyone else that is not the private sector, like, people. And there's always going to be someone, even if we, 90% agree to do, there's always going to be a 10% that they're going to go off on their own tangent, right? Because historically, that's what's been happening, if you think about it. With any controversial sort of technological progress, whether it's
been
cloning or...
I would say it's going a little bit back and forth as well, right? So because, for example, the internet, when the internet was first developed, the purpose of it was to bring us, I think that truly the purpose was an idealist one, that was meant to bring us all together, to make us think more collectively, to connect with each other and so on, right? And to be exposed also to different ways of thinking.
Not the internet, right? The World Wide Web, because the original
you're right.
Was a military anti-nuclear sort of veil-proof system of communicating. So,
Yes.
that's what I mean.
No. You're right. The World Wide Web, the World Wide Web. Sir Berners-Lee and others, who have started working on this early on. I think their purpose was to really, democratize basically access to information and so on. And I think, then clearly it was taken over. It was sort of, and it was also sponsored by all of us in a way, because it was paid for mostly by tax money. And so in a way it was done, you could say for the people, by the people, and then it was hijacked. There's a whole thing about that. There's a whole history as to how it was in a way hijacked by larger players, but I don't want to get too off the track. But I think also on this note, do you think that startups and you've been active in the startup space and in the ESG startup space, how can they play a role to perhaps make this whole system a bit more democratic and more oriented toward consumers and users and people who are affected by it?
Well, I think it's what they're doing already. The problem, again, is the ecosystem of startups at the moment. So going from starting from your original question, startups, again, is not anything new, but in the last 5 years, and especially during COVID, most startups, or a much larger proportion of startups, are ESG orientated. There's a whole new generation of people that, if you think about, I'm talking about mostly, and I'm sorry, it has to be like that, but that's how it is. It's mostly westernized thinking, but not necessarily geographically speaking, but the whole process and approach of these things. There's a whole bunch of people that are around 30 years and younger old. I'm generalizing just for the economy of the conversation now. That are much more aware that we need to do better, right? So there's a lot more startups that are ESG orientated. And when I say ESG, however, it's mostly E, then S, and a lot less G, from my experience. So it's more.
So could you break that down a bit more? What are these letters stand for? What do they stand for? And
so E being environment related, right? So there's a lot more startups that are trying to find ways to help with reversing or dealing, or finding ways of reclaiming nature after all the damage we've done, or finding ways to buy us time even, right? That's a big focus for the last 2-3 years. After COVID, there's also a resurgence of the S, which is society. So how do we help people lead better lives, optimize their well-being, mental health, not just physical health, financial health, but there's also a resurgence again, which we haven't seen on a thinking level since the late 80s, early 90s, of connecting all these things like physical, mental health, and financial health as to one well-being, because all of these affect each other. And there's a lot less G, because, and this is my personal experience, right? I think G is the least logically derived sort of common sense because it's very, very specialized. So when you go into governance, which G stands for, you again obviously have to find solutions of specific problems. However, these are much more specific than me leading my life or looking at the environment around me and coming up with new ideas as a startup, because you have to go into infrastructure, you have to go into governmental projects and bureaucracy, and you have to go into inefficiencies and things like that. So with the exception of, for example, smart cities that do have governance as a de facto building element into them, not a lot of people go into it because, first of all, it's not as attractive, to be perfectly honest. It doesn't get your creative juices flowing. Here is 500 manuals about the general, public transportation system. Find the problems and resolve them. That takes, a lot more effort. However, they are the ones with a higher level usually of success because they are very targeted, and you already have someone who immediately is going to see if you are successful in your endeavors, the benefit or the ROI or whatever KPI you want to use. However, most people are going after the E and S because, first of all, it's easier for me because I'm living it, whether it's the environmental or the social aspect of it. It's more inspirational for the average person that is going to have a startup, and I think it's a better cause in most people's minds. I mean, we need all three. Don't get me wrong. That's why we have ESG and not something else. But from my experience, E and S are at the moment more in vogue, right? Saying that, in most cases, now the way things have been going, and I'm sure you've seen it yourself, going through the rounds of securing, financing and financial support and going into things like that, it has become, I'm afraid, sort of a thing on its own. It's almost becoming too specific, too formulaic. That's the word I was looking for. So I've seen a lot of startups succeeding in moving forward because of the way they were presenting the idea rather than of the idea itself, if you know what I mean. Like anything that has becomes more mass and populated, things need to make them easier for people that are involved, going into structures, going into patterns, going into mannerisms even. And a lot of the funds and a lot of the investors that I've experienced, unless they have been in the game for a long time, which becomes a smaller percentage because a lot more people are going into investing in startups in the last few years that are investors in other things as well, not just technology. It's easier to convince them with, as I said, the way or the lingo you're going to use, the how glossy your presentation is going to be, versus the actual feasibility or the impact potentially that the startup is going to have. That's one major aspect. And the other is, with so many startups now, we've been discussing for, I don't know how many minutes already. I'm sure 20 startups have just got, organized and came to being. There's a lot of overlap. Which is very frustrating, and it's very hard to filter out. So a startup or two might overlap with another 20, not in its entirety, but some of the things one will cover, two more will have some elements of their own, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why I keep saying governance is easier as long as you're willing to do the boring, research first. And if this continues, already a lot of people think that this is a sort of an industry now, a startup industry, which is crazy. It shouldn't be something like that because it's a conflicting worlds. But a lot of people think already that startups is an industry, and you see more and more of the same people winning, going to the next round, and not necessarily the ones that would have a better impact or more impact to things.
I'm wondering if there isn't somewhat of a technological fix to it as well,
AI.
sort of to create, yeah, exactly, sort of a search engine through the space of potential products and services, right? And where you can fill the whole. Basically, if you have an idea, you should be able to situate this idea in some space. We can even visualize it and say, okay, here I am in this space. And there are some things to the left and to the right and in front of and behind me, but I am actually filling this hole that isn't really quite occupied in this way or something like this. There should be some tools that allow you to navigate this in an intelligent way, even in a visual way, I think. Is there anything like that at all?
Not organized yet, because the thing is, everything that is surfaced on a level that you or I would go online and look for it and find it, it sort of doesn't negate the issue about the industry aspect of things. It actually aggravates it. It should be that these tools should be so specific that there would immediately be B2B rather than B2 everyone. I'm not saying C now. In the sense of, here's a serious investor, group or a fund or anything like that. You go to them and say, listen, we already see a pattern, because in the end of the day, everyone is human and they have their own biases, they have their own patterns of thinking. Here is a pattern of what you've done so far. This is what has worked or hasn't worked for you. Please use our solution for a more objective, quote unquote, way of discerning and qualifying further opportunities. Saying that, and again, might go to philosophy again, but it's not. The problem is, especially with E, that in the end of the day, startups need to be successful because someone is going to be interested in them, right? Because ESG is now almost becomes a hygiene factor for most corporations, businesses, brands, filling the gap. I'm not sure, especially when it comes to E, and this is a huge conversation that's been had for years now, that we have the right KPIs as to what is good, so as to then know which startup is the most beneficial or not. So, for example, I'll give you, everybody's talking about carbon offset for ages now, and as being a major KPI, right? But more and more, we see it's not the right KPI, or at least it's not universally as right as people would like it to be. Why? Because it's probably even being misused with the way, with the way of being a huge corporation that you just buy carbon offset units from the market, the stock market of carbon offsetting, and then you just continue doing what you're doing, or delaying greatly, changing your core aspects of why you need carbon offset to begin with, right? So when you have those KPIs, they're not fundamentally right, but startups still use them as to think of what they will offer back to the planet, the society, etc. What's the point? Crap in, crap out, oversimplifying things again. But so I would love to see startups that would tackle those fundamental issues, right? Let's discover what are true KPIs when it comes to betterment of our situation on an ESG level.
But isn't that a question of science more than, or social science rather than one of startups? I agree with you. We need absolutely good measurements, right? Good measurements and good targets, which should be in some ways separate things, because of Goddard's law that if you have a target and you use it as a measure, clearly there will be some incentives to to manipulate it, right? So we have to have kind of both. We have to have some sort of independent measures of how something, and we have to have some targets. But those shouldn't those be given by social science or by science in general, or maybe by a panelist of scientists and social scientists, rather than by necessarily startups?
A lot of startups are academic and scientific driven, right? They're not all, private citizens or just graduates. Most actually successful startups or significantly impactful startups come from those arenas and areas. It's a sense of how fast you want things to go, because the one thing about startups is they do have a momentum, they do have an acceleration speed, because everybody wants to see, results. So if we could have, startups within the scientific disciplines that you need to come up with these KPIs, I'd be happy, because we would arrive to more significant results faster. Because as I said, there is a timer when it comes to E. So in that sense, yeah. I mean, if we could do it on a purely academic level, and a government level, whatever that means, or authority level, because it could be something like, the World Organization, the UN, or things like that. Yeah, but unfortunately, empirically, these are very slow-moving organizations.
But how do you make money by creating, say, metrics or KPIs, right? So the question for a startup generally is that they have to make money, whereas academic institutions or World Health Organization, UN, and so on, they don't necessarily have to make money, right? They're getting money through donors or through some other means. They don't generally have to be in the business of selling something, right? So, but if the creation of KPIs or metrics, if you will, isn't itself a lucrative enterprise? Is it? Or can you make money creating new KPIs? And there's two elements to this answer, I believe. One is, if you take data analytics for any other purpose, like business purposes, there's a lot of money in that. Of course, this business model is gonna weaken a bit because of AI, because it's gonna get more automated than before. But still, being able to measure as accurate as possible and even have predictive analytics and then prescriptive analytics, that's even further down the line of the conversation. There's a lot of money to be had. But when it comes to specifically what we discussed, that are KPIs that are not necessarily business related, I think it's a matter of connecting the dots. Because if you have true KPIs about the environment and about society, you will find the benefit in the end of the day of the economy, because all of these things are completely interrelated. However, the second part of the answer is universities or academia or even governmental organizations. They might not make money, but they vie for money. They do fight over acquiring more and more funding, right, and budgets. The business model there is, okay, we can replace the word business, but there's a funding model that has a completely different but parallel to the business model dimension, which is the more money I have, the more research I can get, the more famous my institution, myself, my unit. I mean, it is, however, something that requires equally money in the end of the day. Yeah, but it seems to me that it's about papers, right? Publishing, research, being accepted by Nature, right? That sort of thing will get you more funding, right? To have publication in Nature magazine or in, very prestigious scientific journals and so on. It seems that is an output that in itself is justifiable at an academic institution, but maybe not so much with a startup, right? So if a startup publishes papers on what makes for good environmental or social measurements, like ESG measurements, right? And then these measurements then have to be somehow also enforced, right? Because right now, the things that save you money would be to to have less, I guess, net emission or something like that, because then you're avoiding some tax categories, or you are basically, as a business, you're playing to what the government requires of you, right? Sort of, how to say, compliance.
Sure, but the people that make up what is compliant or not, they can really make a lot of money. It depends on whether you're in it for the money or whether you're in it for the fame, or both. Because a lot of people from academia, once they've found something that is actually useful and they had a startup, they had a parallel, or they changed completely course in their personal lives, or in parallel became millionaires, or one doesn't exclude the other. It's again what drives you. If you're driven by money or fame or both, you can find it, as long as I said, you focus also some energy into redesigning a more efficient way of keep performance indexes on all these levels, because I don't think we have it. Every time we make something big and we say this is going to be great for the environment, after a while, there are definite signs that actually it's not as straightforward and easy. Biggest example.
But it could be. Okay, so just to be the devil's advocate here is to say, that maybe the problem is the incentive structure, right? Because if you can make a lot of money by designing better metrics, or say KPIs, what is better, right, is it's a matter of who pays you, right? In a way, I hate to put it in those ways, but
if you can
exactly. But I mean, what does it mean to be better for the environment, right? That in itself is sort of something that has to be measured again, right? So exactly. It's like it's very difficult to say, like, here is a metric, I can measure this metric, and I claim that it's better for the environment, but that in itself is requires another measure or something else to then say that it is actually.
Again, oversimplifying the question is who will be able to connect all the dots of the total journey of something being made or being regenerated for the environment. So, for example, famous case in point, electric vehicles, right? Better for the environment. It's not as straightforward as that, because once it depends on how deep you go into this whole process. If you take the normal internal combustion engine versus an electrical one, emissions obviously are zero versus even the most modern internal combustion engine today. However, if you see what it took to create the batteries, the minerals behind the batteries, the workforce, where it was, not having considered the recycling issue 20 years from now, when batteries are going to be more prevalent around, things like that, then you realize that electric vehicles are actually not necessarily that better for the environment. And again, I keep saying AI, but like with other major questions that we still have, and the answer might already be there, but we haven't connected all the dots. AI being by default the best solution as a humankind so far found in pattern recognition, really, it might help people, maybe new startups or in general, to say, okay, let's connect all the dots possible now. Let's just start doing a much better job of identifying all of these points in production, in cost-effective or non-cost-effective materials, take all of the factors, because that's the problem, the complexity of it, right? And try and understand what will be better for the environment beyond not using cars, obviously. That's a simple answer.
But there will be some trade-offs, right? So ultimately, always. In most cases, it will not be perfect. You have to make some trade-offs. For example, for sure, wind energy is better probably overall than coal. But maybe, nuclear energy could be, right? So I don't want to upset the Germans, but they, for some reason, ban nuclear all across the board. And then what ends up happening is it falls onto coal, which I think in the short run, in any case, it's worse. In the long run, we don't know. Actually, could be also worse. But this kind of trade-offs also, coal versus wind. Wind isn't entirely perfect either, because it does have some footprint, right? Every kind of way to get energy out of the environment it will essentially require some footprint. In effect, it's better if we could cut down on the energy usage overall, right? So then, you have to do these kind of careful trade-offs, and then it's like, how to do them and how we weigh different. So, for example, what do we value more? Some sort of some amount of CO2 output versus the destruction of a coral reef, right? So then we have to actually ask ourselves, what do we value more on the margins, right? And I think ultimately we will require a human to make some judgment, right? Because judgment is not something AI can do. AI can only optimize some metric that we already give it, right? So we have to have a metric. And I feel like that this one ultimately has to be built by humans at this point, because it requires ethical thinking, it requires normative thinking, and I think AI is not able to do
AI
that.
will give you I think all the necessary, or potentially can give you all the necessary data or scenarios in order to make an educated, ethical, unethical, that's a completely different point, but judgment, as you said. Yeah, I'm not waiting for. Hopefully, it won't be that we'll have an AI overload that will then just rule us, no matter how benevolent or not it will be. But all I'm saying is at least we'll be able to connect the dots that so far we haven't been able, and there won't be complete. It's never going to be 100%. There's no perfect in the end of the world, but hopefully it'll be a huge, it'll be a huge step or jump ahead, because we need it. The moment I think we're trying to fix things based on a very imperfect framework, we need to better that framework. Otherwise, it's very inefficient, and it's a shame. All this effort, all this money, all this brain power could be even if you take the whole thing, even 10% more efficient would be a tremendous boon for our well-being. For as a society, as the planet, as everything.
So when you talk about efficiency, you mean sort of with respect to the environment?
With respect to the environment, with respect to society, with respect to everything. So in terms of S, right? For S, imagine startups also that fall under medical purposes. I truly believe with all the knowledge somewhere around the planet online for a lot of ailments that we can find a cure for. We just haven't connected them. And that's, again, where I also say AI will help in that respect. It's the same exact thing as before, but based on medical knowledge. There's so much research that is going on. There's so much old research that we forgot about and we're not taking into consideration. I mean, in the field of medicine and in a lot of fields, there's this thing of rediscovering things because we forgot they were discovered because they were archived somewhere inefficiently. It's true, and the more we connect things, the more we're gonna know. Actually, by taking this part of that research and those part from this other dozen research, we can cure this cancer. And it was all there. It was just someone didn't connect the dots, and this is where we can have leaps and bounds in the evolution of things, just by taking advantage of what we already have amassed.
So it kind of relates to the idea of who's going to read all the work we've produced, right? Humans might not be able to read it all and make sense of it. You're a doctor somewhere in New York. You might not know what research has been done in Mumbai or in some other place. And so you're saying AI basically has this capability of searching through this massive space of, let's say, PhD dissertations and work that has been done all over the world that's just sitting, Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I find that really interesting. I want to also, before we go, within this conversation, make sure that I ask you something about the specifics of maybe a few projects that you did or have done or are doing right now at the Newton's laboratory.
Sure.
What is that like? So what sort of work do you do? And could you maybe give us a couple examples of actual practical problems you're working on?
Of course. First of all, you have to understand the Newton's Laboratory is an advertising agency at heart, right? And that makes it very interesting in the sense that, first of all, we have a huge spectrum of clients across all categories you can imagine. And that is really great, and not so great in the sense that you can go in any direction possible. And my department, we call it Business Creativity and Innovation, it has a dual role, obviously to consult clients on innovation, and I'll define exactly how we mean innovation in a second, and to also help the agency itself evolve with and through innovation. Now, innovation, it doesn't necessarily mean technology. It has a lot to do with technology, but it could be just by applying a new model of thinking, by identifying inefficiencies and taking them out of the equation. It doesn't have to be always about technology. We use a lot of technology as tools ourselves for our coming up with ideas, and sometimes for implementation with clients and internally, but it's not a technology department in that sense. And I keep saying that because it's a tremendous difference, to make sure people understand that, because sometimes when you take just thinking an idea and they go, yeah, but where's the high tech? Where's the where's the AI? It doesn't have to always be there. As long as you can make things better or bring in something new in the sense of, that old golden nugget called added value, right? And let me give you an example. So we have, I'll give you the simplest example. So we have the National Lottery here as a client, right? And the thinking that we apply in terms of helping them, which is a very broad organization. It's not just the lottery; it has the full spectrum of gaming and gambling, etc. But it's also one of the main contributors to society when it comes to giving back, because by law, a big percentage of their income goes back to society. So to charity, to infrastructure, to things like that. On a daily basis, we can think of a simple addition to their application that promotes loyalty, just by including a small timer, because they have a lot of actual physical shops. So by saying because the application is beacon activated, so the system knows when you're in the shop and when you're not. It can actually have a timer and say, again, for the argument's sake, that every 7 minutes that timer is 0. It will give you a small incentive or a small loyalty bonus, right? So if you're playing for something, it'll give you an extra 50 cents to play, or it'll give you an extra participation in some of the games, etc. How does that help? It helps because, if you were about to leave, you might see that your timer is only a minute and a half before it zeroes. So you will remain within the shop a minute and a half longer. Chances are you might play more. Incrementally, that is a revenue boom for the organization, because even if a small percentage of the people that would otherwise leave during that time frame play just 10 cents more, 20 cents more, it translates into a lot of money annually for the organization.
So using kind of behavioral science or behavioral...
It's all behavioral. I should have said something from the start when you mentioned my background. Because my background is behavioral sciences and psychology and consumer psychology, I don't believe that anything but let me reverse that. I don't think that there is any project that doesn't have a target audience at the end of the day. Whether it's a consumer, whether it's the client themselves, whether it's internal, external, there's always a human target audience in the end of the day that with what you're doing, with whichever project you have, with whichever idea, you have to satisfy to somehow make their lives better. Is it going to be through more entertainment? Is it going to be through more rewards? Is it going to be through better health? In the end of the day, there's always a human target audience. So for me, it's probably because the way, that was my original starting point and I cannot escape it. But for me, there's always a behavioral aspect to things. Otherwise, I cannot function. I don't know where to start my thinking from. So
are you familiar with Shoshana Zuboff's work on the whole idea of surveillance capitalism, and the way that I guess it you could see it as a somewhat of an abuse of behavioral sciences to or notch theory, right? For example, what Facebook has done, which is destroyed in a way you could say that it destroyed our parts of our consciousness or part of our focus, right? It distracted us and even made us angry. So if you look at the research that has been leaked, there's this thing called the Facebook files. It's quite interesting. But what this seems to have started actually with Google. So I don't want to give them an easy out either, because essentially they didn't make any money, and the investors were knocking at their door, and they were saying, what are you going to do for money? And they realized that they had all of this behavioral data sitting around, people searching things, and so then they monetized it, and now they sold it also to other people, like other companies, for example, predictive data, right? What are you going to do next? What is going to make you click on whatever ad, and so on. And it turns out, then suddenly, you have lost complete control of your data and of your digital life because of this kind of event, right? So what is your thinking there? And in terms of ethics, do you address that in your pamphlet as well?
Well, the AI ethics, no, it's much more focused on the specific, technology. But with like any tool or any application of any science or discipline that has some science behind it, you can abuse it or not. Depends on the people behind it, right? So we had, a lot of people in the medical field that would, for their own understanding and progress in their minds, would do atrocities to further their, what they thought would benefit others. So it's not necessarily just technology and data that it's human nature. In that sense, that's why you need very strict legal frameworks. You need all the checks in place so abuses are not happening, or at least when they happen, to be fast enough to dynamically upgrade, shift, change, whatever, evolve all these systems in place that would protect people, right? The problem is with data and whether you lose your data or not, the control of your data or not, it has become legal in the sense of it's regional. So it's very completely different to the US, as you were aware, versus Europe. Some might say, however, in Europe, GDPR is so strict that it goes to the other side of not being very productive. There isn't one version of the truth in that sense, but there's definitely a whole conversation about your digital self, obviously. When I was years ago in Cognizant, the big technology company, we used to call our digital selves code halos. So all of the things that make up for your digital footprint, we used to call that code halo. And we actually were trying to find ways of, first of all, protecting it, but equally finding ways and business models of a lot of big companies that wanted to evolve into becoming digital halo gatekeepers. So hopefully I'm not, I won't say the name because I'm not sure whether it's declassified or not. a huge technology company that is that started from and still is heavily involved in telecommunications. Their 50-year plan is to completely abandon telecommunications and become digital self-gatekeepers. So being the ones that will say your digital self, everything that your data is, all data about you are protected by us. So, and this is a business model that a lot of big companies, including Google, including Meta, are looking into. Because, it makes sense for them because they started the problem to begin with, a lot of them, but others that haven't started the problem, they realized how easy it is and will be to completely have people in their, prisoners of the data, if that's the case. It's happening all over every day, whether it's scams or phishing or whether it's data hosted, being held as hostage, right? And it happens with individuals right now of high worth because that's where the money is, in the sense, or big organizations. I'm sure you've heard a lot of examples of universities or hospitals that have been locked out of their systems for ransom. The equivalent of that being done on a personal basis is what everybody is afraid of, because once everything's going to be completely online, because we're still not there yet, but it will be the case, including biometrics, then it's a clear, danger as to what that might leave us open to. But I know a lot of big companies and a lot of governments are actually looking into how do we make sure that we're safe from that. The way that organizations and structures keep us safe in the physical world as well. Whether it's so it is something that there's a lot of investment in right now, and of course it also overlaps with things like cybersecurity, things like that. But it's going to go way beyond that.
But it's in some cases, in most cases, or I would say in a lot of cases, right, I would say that it isn't really necessarily purposeful, right? So I don't think that Facebook was thinking, let's drive teenage girls to suicide, with our products, or let's, increase racism or something like this. I think that these things that happened, like the increasing of racism, for example, at Facebook, it's been documented now that every sixth racist who is on Facebook has been brought to this racist position through Facebook. So they weren't racists before, but they were made to be racists in the process of being on Facebook, and that's forced, right? So there's a lot of the different research that shows all of the different problems that happen with Facebook, but it isn't that Facebook was out to do that. They wanted to make money, right? So this business model of maximizing attention. So that these sort of things could inadvertently happen, right? It's not that they're purposefully designed to destroy society, but it sort of happens as a oops kind of accident.
It does. You're right, but my counterpoint is it just is more efficient than before. It's keep happening forever, and I'll give you an example, right? Going back to the Romantics, a lot of women were committing suicide based on the literature they were reading. Much less of an effect, right? Because it was a specific part of the society that had access to that kind of literature, that actually could read, being women at the time, etc., etc. Fast forward, beginning of mid-80s, I believe, the perfect body syndrome, showing all these perfect blondes in advertising and Baywatch and things like that, where not even 5% of the population could live to that standard, that all of a sudden all these teenage girls thought they were the weird ones, they were the defective ones, because they were bombarded by all these covers and all these all this content on the television, etc. Again, much more mass than the previous example, but now with the advent of the internet and everyone being connected to everything, the problems that, as you say, I don't think they're on purpose. They just happen because we don't, we don't put enough of effort in filtering things and thinking about them because of profit seeking. However, they're much more prevalent now because more and more people and faster have access to content like that. Specifically with racism, it's a very interesting point, though, because that's my take on it, right? How Facebook...
But there's also... There's a personalization element to it, right? So it's basically if you start, at first you don't see the racist content. You see something that's a little bit maybe that hints in this direction, perhaps in a very subtle way, and it gets increased, so you're getting more and more overt racist content, and then it sort of slowly walks you into this kind of right. And I think it happens because of the maximization of attention.
It's the algorithm behind it.
Right. But also the metric, right? Because it's interesting that you're saying, the metrics when we're talking about, KPIs and so on, the wrong metrics. If you're optimizing the wrong target, sometimes it will lead to disasters that are completely outside of your comprehension and you wouldn't have been able to see. So I think that, maximizing this metric of attention leads to more racism, because racism actually garners attention. Because if a racist comes into a bar and says something racist, everybody in the bar will suddenly look at this person, right?
Yeah, it's more sensationalistic, basically, right?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
The rags of newspapers of the ones that were full of scandals and lies. It's the same thing. It's addictive because they're very sensationalistic. The thing is, we're inherently biased. So racism is inherent biases going off chart, right? So the algorithm is not prepared because it wasn't well thought of because of the wrong KPIs. It accentuates that. You're interested in things more so, but little by little, dare I say the word, brainwashes you, and you then, because of all this content, you think that's the sphere of the world, and everybody also wants to be, part of the world, and that's the problem for me. And we had that discussion at some point when Facebook was still called Facebook, not Meta. And with years ago on a LinkedIn event in London, the economy of attraction, right? That's what we used to call it. You're right. That's the main KPI. We said, listen, this is not a good KPI because, and to be perfectly fair, we chose it because it's the most directly linked to profits, right? However, if you chose a KPI of what makes people happier, it might take longer to come up with the profits, but it would sustain your profitability and your audience a lot longer, right? And going back to what I was saying, maybe it's not a startup, maybe it's an organization, maybe, I don't know, but hopefully if a startup can find a way to showcase that this is how you can make money by making people happy at the same time, I think no one's going to deny using that KPI if you show them, the business model behind it. I don't think people are inherently bad. We're greedy, and that turns into a lot of badness. But it's a matter of the framework. And behaviorally speaking, and abusing behavior, right? It goes back to ethics again. If I gave you a magic key, right? I gave you a USB stick and said the minute you plug this into your laptop, there's going to be code that's going to affect all of the major platforms, social media platforms, and newsletters, aggregators of news, etc., and will brainwash everyone. Will affect them behaviorally to be better. Would you use it? It's still behavioral.
I would want to really know about the KPIs. What does it mean to be better? That's
exactly. Well, okay. Let's say that being benign or I would give you a 50% increase on us being better to our fellow human. Would you use it so? Because it's still going to be behavioral,
alteration.
Manipulation.
Yeah, no. It's but everything again. See, this manipulation is another one of those terms that is a very interesting one, right? Because even language itself, please give me a banana or something like this. That immediately is a type of manipulation, right? You're asking someone to give you something on the other side of the room, say, or whatever, and that is a form of manipulating them to give you what you're asking for, right? So any kind of language has that sort of manipulative tendency, right? I mean, that's just part of what we do, right? It's part of
being
communication.
Human.
But I think I think really important is this difference between, will this communication act benefit you, or is it a hostile or a beneficial or benevolent kind of act of communication, right? So if it's manipulating you to your own benefit, or at least this is the intention, then I think it's a different quality of manipulation than if you're doing something, covertly to actually simply get someone to buy more even cheeseburgers, right? I think that's a problem, because cheeseburgers are not good for you, and you shouldn't be asked to eat more of them. And in fact, if something manipulates to eat more of them, it's I think it's an issue.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my favorite joke when it came to psychology when I was still in uni was, how does a Greek mom change a light bulb? She just sits in the corner and says, "Oh, don't mind me. I'll stay here in the dark. Don't worry about me." The kids change the light bulb. That's manipulation, right? I mean, at the end of the day. And if when you're a parent, you realize how much manipulative you get to be with kids in order to be able
and they are manipulative too. Children learn that very quickly. Yes,
they learn that from the parents, and there's this big realization when you become a parent that it's okay to lie a lot of the time, because there is benevolence behind the lie. In most cases. Right, but also sometimes you're just so especially young parents, they're so tired, they're so up to their ears, they will lie to make things easy for them as well. So it's human nature. It's just hopefully just being one step ahead of your bad drivers and your bad motives, because everybody, I think in most cases, for 90% of the time, knows what's good and bad, right? Knows what's right or wrong. There are very few things that are so ambivalent that it...
I don't know. I mean, if we're going into the area of, say, sexual behavior among young people, right? You have a large variety of opinions there. Going from, let's say, the leaders of Iran, right, who have a very specific opinion on what qualifies as legitimate sexual behavior, and people in San Francisco have a rather different opinion of it. So I'm with the people of San Francisco in the sense that I think that we should have complete freedom over our own sexual behavior, the same way that I think we should also have complete freedom as to what we put into our own bodies. But I do not think we should have, I think that's my view on this, right? So, but I think you can disagree with this view.
No, I mean, I'm with you in that sense. And obviously I didn't think like the religious leader of Iran or something like that, but in your heart, for yourself, and how you might do something to someone else, I think in most cases you will know whether it's right or wrong. Now, of course, you are the outcome of your surrounding and your context. So, it could be that I truly believe that by burning someone because they had sex before their marriage, I'm doing the right thing. But I don't think even zealots at some point go against the better, universal human judgment. But again, there's no way of tracking. This is again a philosophical discussion.
But then when you build AI, right, and you are releasing it on a global level, you were alluding to this earlier, that if there are some real contentious issues, for some reason your experience involves something that could be different for people who identify as different genders or something like this. I can't think of anything in particular right now, but
No, there is bias.
in that case,
bias in AI has been detected in terms of racial bias, right? Just today I was reading an article on some a collective of artists that wanted to showcase that Midjourney is very biased in its output versus people of color, specifically black people. Listen, in the end of the day, it's at the moment, any tool, any creation that is not self-aware, going back to the original question of the discussion, is going to be as good as the creator. And this is something that it's been realized forever. If you remember, I mentioned about Talos, the robot in ancient times. It's been written back then that Talos was very susceptible to the female nude form, because if Festos, the god that made him, was susceptible to it because it was his creation, he had the same biases and the same weaknesses as he. So even back then, people realized that we cannot sometimes escape who we are, what we are, because of the people that made us what we are, right? And that goes back to parents, to society, culture, all of these things. So AI still operates under the same constriction, biases, etc., until the point where it can evolve itself and become better.
So I have this thinking again along those lines, sorry to interrupt you, but right around those lines, I'm thinking if we build it together, right, if we are really driving this democratization thing forward to the extreme in a way, then we can involve the judgment of many different types of people, how they want to be treated by the AI or how they want to interact with the AI and how they might want to be affected by it. So I feel that, and of course this is a very individualistic point of view as well, but this is already dicey because, maybe in some places it should be much more about community than about what you get to define. But being an individualist, I think that, we should let people really interact with the AI and actually direct its ethical direction, because I think no ethical school of thought is really complete in the way. And I think that people should have a right to demand a certain, that their own ethic is applied when they're being affected by the algorithm. I think there is something about that. What are your thoughts on that?
If it can be done with equal access, it'd be great, because again, and I might, putting it down a notch, make it very practical, because then again, all the data points will be more democratic in the sense that everybody influence the outcome. If we say that there's going to be a huge, brilliant AI that would be able to have access to every single one of us and understand us, and see what makes us tick, what's good for us, what's bad for us, because a lot of people do not only ask what's good for them. They cannot but help ask for things that are bad for them. As long as there's 8 billion of us roughly at this point on the planet, right? If that imaginative AI has access to every single one of us somehow and get that input, I think that would be a brilliant thing, because then, and that's where my optimism comes in. I think when all things are equal and you can get as close to objectivity as possible, I don't believe that anyone would be bad, to be perfectly honest. If there's that individuality, that self, I looking out for myself only, that benefit, that self-preservation that goes bad a lot of the times is being nullified by numbers, 8 billion, right? And someone can understand what's universally good. I don't think that there's an option to then be bad. The only problem with that logic, and I recognize it in myself, is if such a big, entity rises, where will it draw the line of what's good or bad? Because if it just stops with us, great. I'm very optimistic about our future and our coexistence with it. If it includes other species, animals, if it includes the environment as part of having the same rights of existence as us, we might be in trouble because we're not very good towards other species or ourselves or the environment. So this is what everybody's afraid of in the end of the day. However, again, I'm being very optimistic about things like that because I think that if there is a system in the end of the day that will at some point have total access, it will find a way to help us become better. Because why not? I mean, I don't presume to understand potentially the thinking or the motives of such a future thing, maybe a completely different consciousness to ours and way of thinking, or but hopefully, because it will be at some point created by us and still have a connection to us, I'm optimistic about how it can benefit us in the end by seeing the bigger picture. Because in the end of the day, all of the theme of this conversation is the bigger picture and really connecting all the dots in the end of the day. So I'm mildly optimistic and carefully optimistic for the future.
Great. So let me just ask you this one question: What do you want our audience to take away from this conversation? Is there some big points that you would like them to hold on to?
Don't be afraid to participate, because for the last few years, technology has made life easier and more convenient, and that's great. And everybody is talking about, user experience and making things frictionless and smooth. And to be fair, with a touch of a button there, or with a seamless journey, you can enjoy many things that you couldn't even a few years back, right? Don't let that lull you. Don't let that put you in sort of a paternalistic mood with technology. The one thing to just don't worry, everything will be taken care of. That platform, that brand, that application, that system, because of what we're discussing. Because you're not then putting your full, influence as to what things will be in the future, and you will. Instead of controlling things that will happen to you, just allow things to happen to you, and you might not, like it. So I would say that instead of seeing this just our evolution, instead of seeing this just as an easier life, look at it as an easier life in terms of having more time to think and better yourself, rather than just enjoy things only. Or just go with the flow, because again, historically, whenever societies had some level of being able to have time to think and progress, that's when leaps and bounds in society have happened. I'm not talking about just political, right? Technological, but also political, cultural, etc. So don't let technologies just use you and or cuddle you. Just be more active with what you have, because if life becomes better and easier for you, then you have more opportunity to do more with it.
That's great advice, I think. So, Christian, one last thing I want to ask you, and that is, how do audience members and people who want to know more about your work, how do they keep up with you? How do they stay in touch with you and learn about what you do at the Newton Laboratory and also on your own and other projects?
Well, I'm very traditional like that. Definitely Newton's, the Newtons.gr is the hub of all the output that we have. But if they want a more direct and personal, input or connection, LinkedIn is probably the best way to go at it. That's where still I make most of my interesting new connections and friends or business partners.
I want to apologize to my audience for not having published this show in the recent weeks because I have started a new job at the Kingston Business School in the Brains Lab. So I have got run a bit behind in my editing. I will get some support from my university to do the editing, and this will put this show back on a weekly schedule in the fall. In the meantime, in the summer, things will be a bit slower. The next time the show will be published, hopefully next week, I will be meeting with Naveen Sharma, and we will be speaking about collective intelligence and community intelligence as he understands them, which is in terms of devices rather than in terms of human-to-human intelligence.
So community intelligence is something like someone learning something, someone doing some innovations, and then other people, other humans are learning that thing, they innovating it, they improving it, and then they correcting it. And this is how you are making a very good, one of the best solutions for any problem. This is how it works in our society. The same way in technology industry, devices are excellent. Softwares are excellent. They are doing a good in artificial intelligence each and every day. New innovations happening with the help of AI. New models are there. They are doing good learning, but there is no cooperation, no coordination, and not at all. There is so each and every organization or device, if they want to learn something, it's their own learning. What we are doing in community intelligence or collective intelligence, if a device is learning something, some AI is going on it, the learning is shared with another devices in a mesh, which having another learning capacity, and they can utilize that learning to improve the learning, to use the learning in their process, and based on their learning, they can implement the new things, and that new learning can come back to the original creator.